See some familiar faces, some regulars. It's great to see you all.
Recording.
Everybody's in from the waiting room, Angie? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Cathy Hailey, Vice President of the Northern Region of the Poetry Society of Virginia. And this is Angela Dribben, Vice President of the Western Region. Angie and I are celebrating PSV, Poetry Society of Virginia's Centennial year with a series of monthly readings called Virginia Voices. The intention is to remember why we came together in PSV in the first place, to share how we as individuals came to practice the art of poetry, and to deepen the connection of our community statewide. Episodes are held on Zoom at 5:30 on the second Wednesday of each month. Each episode features 2 members of the Poetry Society of Virginia. We ask the same 3 questions and ask featured poets to read 3 poems in each episode. Today, we feature Nathan Richardson. If you want to give a little wave, Nathan.
Hello, hello from the road.
Southeast region. Is that the right?
Yes.
And David Anthony Sam. A little wave, David.
Good
Vice
evening.
President of the North Central region. Both of these poets are working on our Centennial Committee, planning the May Festival, which will invite all of you to attend in Richmond, first weekend of May. I'll start by introducing the poets. Nathan Richardson is a published author, performance poet, and Frederick Douglass historian. His poetry collections include Likeness of Being, 21 Imaginary T-shirts, and The Last Poems of an Unarmed Citizen. Books featuring Nathan's success story include You Can Do That, Amazing People with Amazing Jobs by David Messick, and You Don't Want Success, Demolishing Fears and Excuses by Miko Marsh. Nathan is now in the 8th year of the Frederick Douglass Speaking Tour, a living history performance in which he captures completely the physical and spiritual essence of the former slave, writer, orator, and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Nathan, say something for 1 second so that we can see you in the speaker window.
Sure.
There we go.
Thank you. I was hoping that I sent you a short bio.
You did. And then David Anthony Sam. David lives in Virginia with his wife, Linda. His poetry has appeared in over 100 journals. His collection, Writing the Significant Soil, was awarded the 2021 Poetry Prize by Homebound Publications and published by Wayfarer Books, July 2022. 6 other collections are in print, including Final Inventory, Prolific Press 2018, and Dark Fathers, Kelsey Books, 2019. An 8th, Stone Bird, is forthcoming from San Francisco Bay Press in 2023. David teaches creative writing at Germanic Community College and serves as the regional VP on the board of the Virginia Poetry Society. David, would you start us off with a poem?
Absolutely, thank you. I'm gonna do a poem from the Dark Fathers collection. This collection has to do with my relationship with my father, and to some extent, his relationship with his father. The The image in the cover was actually drawn by my sister, and the publisher liked it. The larger face is Elias Sam, my grandfather from Syria, and Tony is emerging from him on the left. Anchises. I heaved my father's corpse into the singing stream that flows into the cave, which opens its mouth just once in every year. His corpse was weighted with my needs and fears, my childhood wants of the tall man who had made me. His corpse was weighted with stones of adolescent anger and with the bulky satchels of an adult disappointed in the terrible heaviness of a too mortal man discovered by his too mortal son. Every year thereafter, I came to stand beside the shining stream, to look again at the closed cave. And every year thereafter, I counted the days of his life that had overlapped the days of my own. And every year thereafter, I dwelt in the heaviness of his leaving me until steadily the darkness of the tall father shadowed smaller and smaller, like the time I realized I had grown taller than he, or that he had shrunk before me. And every year thereafter, I felt the bittersweet of love unweighing itself of the anger of mortality. But on the 10th anniversary of his leaving, when the cavern opened its annual mouth, my father's corpse danced lightly from the water, gilded from mists of spirit, golden with levity, as he sublimated like the ice of winter, directly sunned into the vapors of spring. Thank you. You're muted, Cathy.
Nathan, would you share a poem with us now? That was
Sure.
David,
Yeah, it was a great poem, very touching. And I appreciate his poem because I just, as a matter of fact, lost my father in July, and so that was very, very poignant for me. The poem that I think I'll do is actually not my poem, but it's certainly a reflection of how I write poetry, my approach to poetry. I'm connected to the ancestors and poets that came before me, and then Frederick Douglass has brought me even closer to the poets of the 17th, 18th, 19th century as well, because he was a poet and read the poets. And a lot of times in my poems, I will either follow after another poet, or I might, quote a line. And as a matter of fact, there's a poem that I wrote titled, "We Are the One We've Been Waiting For." And I wrote that poem some years ago, and I did it at the One Love Festival at Virginia Wesleyan. And then it was on YouTube. And then when Barack Obama was elected president, he gave a speech and he quoted the line, "We are the one we've been waiting for." And all of a sudden my phone blew up and said, "Barack Obama is quoting you." And I'm like, no, he's not quoting me. He's quoting the poet June Jordan, who was a poet and a cultural anthropologist who was in Cape Town, South Africa. And she wrote this poem called "Ode to the Women of Cape Town." And in that poem, the line is, "We are the one we've been waiting for." So I wanted to start with a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, which really kind of reflects an ominous, a sorrow, a yearning for freedom. And so the poem is called Ships That Pass at Night by Paul Ernst Dunbar. Out in the sky, the great dark clouds are massing. I look far out into the pregnant night, where I can hear a solemn booming gun that tells me the ship I seek is passing, passing. My tearful eyes, my soul's deep hurt are glassing, for I would hail and check that ship of ships. I would stretch out hands, cry aloud. My voice falls dead a foot from thine own lips, and but its ghost doth reach that vessel, passing, passing. O earth, O sky, O ocean, still surpassing, is there no hope for me? Is there no way that I might catch and check that speeding bark, which out of sight and sound are passing, passing?
Wow. So I'm going to connect with that and the first question, Nathan. Because I want you to think in terms of how that poem might connect to something that you've written, perhaps, or how you connect with it in some way. But what I'd like you to do is share your personal approach to poetry. This is an opportunity to really let us see you as you see yourself within the realm of poetry. And so if this poem takes a lead in that commentary, go ahead and start with that and then tell us whatever else you'd like to tell us.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that my approach to poetry is traditional, from the perspective that all poetry in the beginning was an oral. Poetry was oral before Gutenberg and the printing press. You know, poets got around in circles and shared haikus. They shared limericks, etc., and they recited out loud. And so, my approach to poetry is from the oral tradition and storytelling. And I was a storyteller and observed storytelling that evolved into poetry. And so that's how I came to be a poet, is that way. And then I think if, a lot of poets ask me what style of poetry do I write, I'm certainly heavily influenced by music, by gospel music, by jazz, definitely jazz. And other poets that came before me, and my intent is an outward look into the world. I reflect off of what I see in the world, and what I'm doing right now, and whenever I'm teaching young poets, especially because poets normally start out introspective and they write poems first person, I, me, woe is me. And I try to teach them that you should try to move beyond just examining yourself, because you can actually understand yourself through other people as well, and through the world. And so that's how I try to, that's what I try to reflect in my poetry. The intent, and I think intent is, every poet has overall some kind of intent, what they're trying to say. That sometimes, this is an age of politics, and some poets write about politics, some don't. All poem is political. Even the love poem says, "Vote for me." But I think Walt Whitman captured, for me, the best explanation of my intent. it was his intent. I believe it was the intent of writers in the 19th century. When I read so many poets and speeches of the 19th century, this from Walt Whitman sums it up, and that is, I am the poet of the body. I am the poet of the soul. I go with the slaves of the earth equally with the masters, and I stand between the masters and the slaves, entering into both so that both will understand me alike. And so I certainly want both sides, all races, all creeds, to appreciate what I have to say.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for reminding me of that Whitman line.
Yeah.
David, how about you? What's your personal approach to poetry?
Well, I want to start off by saying what Nathan said. Maybe we just stop there.
No, we're not letting you off the hook that easily.
Several things he said are very parallel to my poetic journey, which is now 55 years old. The oral tradition, I write poetry to be read with the eye, certainly, but I really want it to be read with the mouth, with the lungs, with the breath. I write so that it has its own, I hope, music if it's successful. And it was influenced by a lot of poets. My first, the first poet I fell in love with was Dylan Thomas, which led me to Gerard Manley Hopkins, which led me to trying to read Anglo-Saxon accentual verse and so on. But so there's still remnants of that in alliteration and so on. But I was also very strongly influenced both by Whitman and Dickinson, who are sort of the yin-yang founders of American poetry. The expansiveness of Whitman to swallow the world, to encompass everybody and give voice to everybody. It's just, I think art, in my case, especially poetry, can help us, as Nathan said, to approach understanding the other. Probably, I don't know if any of us even can say we understand really ourselves, let alone anybody else. But the Buddhist virtue of compassion for everything. I think when you read or when you write, so I often will write in my own voice. I'll turn myself into the third person and say he. And when I'm writing to try to give voice to somebody else who maybe didn't have a voice and is now gone, or doesn't have a voice now, I try to use I, which might be presumptuous. Some might even say patriarchal. I don't approach it that way. I approach it as humbly trying to near an understanding of somebody or something other than myself, and celebrate, as Whitman said, them with that voice, and not just make it solipsistic about me and woe is me, as Nathan said. Nathan also talked about storytelling. Even in a lyric poem, there is a story behind it. And the oral tradition that came before writing, I start when I teach poetry in creative writing 1, they may not want to hear it. But, you know, I start with griots and shamans and bards and scopes and,
Yeah.
you know, drums and lyres and chants and incantations, saying, what does that sound like? Hip hop, maybe? And all of a sudden they see hip hop is really a very conservative form of poetry because it goes way back to the way things used to be done. So I write because I don't believe there is any meaning to life inherently. I don't have that faith. But my faith is that life is in finding or creating meaning. And my art is an attempt on a personal level for me to try to mean something through those words and by nearing a voice that might be myself or might be someone else's voice coming back to me.
Wonderful. Would you like to read a second poem, David?
Sure. I'm not as humble as Nathan. I'm reading my own. This poem came from the collection that was mentioned in the introduction. Writing the Significant Soil is, you know, people always will ask me, what's your poetry about? This poem has to do with the land, especially the land along the Appalachians. I was born near the Holler in a suburb of Pittsburgh. I'm a Pennsylvania hillbilly. And now I live in the Piedmont, not too far from the Appalachians. But the relationship of myself with the land and of humans with the land. And I thought I would read a poem that sprang from when my wife and I were invited to visit friends. The husband of the couple is a descendant of a plantation owner, and he still owns some of the land. And Linda and I were wandering around, and we came upon this of bone and limestone. I walk this low heaven of graves of slaves and descendants of slaves on ground they once worked at the old Loudon plantation in far western Alabama. The oldest stones wear single names: Elizabeth, Seth, Jonas, Mary. Bible names, no African names. Some so worn by rain and wind that the careful etchings love made have been sloughed away like the rock surface under waterfall. The newer stones have surnames, but all are rough carved with the caresses of a hand's despair. On the higher hill to the grassy north, slave masters and descendants of slave masters lie in their own segregated disintegration under limestone. Decay unites those never joined in life. I step around these markers, fearful of treading on the calm repose and violating again those whose lives were etched with too much violation. The wind rustles leaves at my feet, and the wind cracks a winter branch from a tall oak with aged joints, a sound like a whip snapping. Cold shivers me, the weak sunlight unable to warm above or below ground. Beneath these fades of names become the limestone blanketed with leaves and their decay. Something remains, long past the end of all motion, embedded in the urges of the earth.
Mm.
Wow. What an experience. And beautiful testimony to it. Nathan, your second poem is going to be a Nathan poem, correct?
Yes, it is. It is. It is going to be a
Wonderful.
Nathan poem. I'm going to stick with what I had decided to read. My mind changes from second to second, but the flow of this is going so well. And my colleague there, I just feel everything he's saying. What he was talking about, a meaning of life and all of that. As a matter of fact, I wrote a poem recently called A Poem to My Body, and the last stanza of it says, the day that I realized my body does not have a soul, that in fact, my soul has my body, and that if I don't take care of my soul is going to find another body, and my body will become ashes. So I definitely feel what he's saying. So this poem is actually from my collection, Likeness of Being, that was published in 2015. And it's a poem that I wrote one Sunday as I was driving out to my home church in Suffolk. And it's called Sunday Welcome. And so you can hear the lyric in it, so to speak. From city traffic, the highway leads, through suburban homes to rural seeds of ponds and pastures of bundled hay, to peanut rows that curve their way to woods that hide the old field mouse. And as I pass the farmer's house, his livestock resting, his tractors idle, his pickup gone, his horse's bridle hangs in the barn. And in the steeple, the church bell rings to call the people whose parents walked and children drove the country mile to Piney Grove. And as I slow, I hear the singing, and once inside, the fans are flinging the summer heat, the occasional wasp, and spirits enduring through all the costs of life and labor. Now together the morning prayer, the songs, the scripture lifts our hearts and bonds the souls of young and strong and weak and old. We all are one, and do encourage you all to come, who've left your farms and cities and drove the country mile to Piney Grove.
Wow. Definitely hear the music in that one. And
Yeah.
you did it beautifully. Or
Thank
you cite it beautifully.
Yeah,
I admire your ability to memorize.
Yeah, well, I've lived it all. I normally don't do poems that I'm not feeling at the moment. I'm just looking for the energy that I'm feeling at the current moment, and that's what I do. Yeah.
I think that's important. I can hear that in your voice as you change the pace. Even though there's a meter to it, you're able to change the pace with that energy.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Nathan, what prompted you to join Poetry Society of Virginia, and how has it possibly made a difference to you?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I tell you what, I was thinking about this today, and definitely want to be very personal about what I'm going to say, because I was very fortunate to make good friends with a wonderful poet in our community who's published just about everybody in Virginia, Pete Freeze. And he and I used to pal around all the time. We went everywhere together, and poetry open mics and readings and conferences. We were part of the CNU Writers Conference for a while. And you know, he was a part, and whatever he was doing, that's what I was doing too, you know. And I joined the Poetry Society of Virginia because I understood that if you're going to be a part of a craft, you want to grow, and the way that you grow is through connecting with other writers and collaborating and those sorts of things. So that's why I joined. And it has greatly benefited me because of those very reasons, that it is opened up opportunities for me to read throughout the state, and very blessed to be one of those considered right now for Poet Laureate. But what I wanted to say specifically, because I'm very in tune with the culture of poetry and the various groups and cliques and those sorts of things throughout Virginia. There's the age demographic, there's the paid versus spoken word, and just so many different cultures within our own community that I frequently find myself in conversation is going in Virginia, and I'm always advocating for the Poetry Society. And as a matter of fact, I was in a conversation just recently where someone was giving me, I'm not sure if I necessarily would say that I'm any kind of example, but they were saying, you know, the person wanted to know if he was going to join the Poetry Society, who was in there that looked like him. And I was like, what do you mean by that? and he said, well, he wants to know who's in there, who's African American. And I was like, well, and so the lady said, well, I told him that you were in there. You were in the Poetry Society of Virginia. And he said, oh yeah, I know him. And so then I said to her, perhaps that's a person that is not mature enough to tag along with you. Just being very frank about it. If I had that attitude, I would not be here. That the only determination that I make on where I go and what I do is the fact that I am a poet. That's my determining factor when I'm invited somewhere, when I decide to go somewhere. It is not that they're going to be Jewish, that they're going to be, was born a storyteller and a poet, and that's the way I live my life. And so I find myself in places that I'm wholly welcome because those people are poets and so am I. And we have things in common. And then that's when we come together, then we share not just our commonalities, but we share the uniqueness that we have in our own cultures and religions and so forth. And I learn because in a poetry environment, you have a table in which all voices are welcome. And so with that, I would say anybody that's out there who says that the Poetry Society is old people, I look old. I got a bald head and I look like I've been to the mountaintop, so I may not be the youngest guy on the block or whatever, but we want young people, especially those of us who are sitting around in the Centennial Planning Committee, we are trying to make sure that we are reaching out to every demographic in Virginia, youth poets and otherwise, to come and share your talent and to find an opportunity for growth. So that's my Poetry Society of Virginia pledge.
That's wonderful. I hope a lot of people listen to that commentary. Thank you.
Yeah.
How about you, David? What brought you to PSV and how is that helping you perhaps?
Well, back up about 3 miles. I've been writing, as I said, for over half a century, but I made a decision that, I wanted to be more like Walter Raleigh or the samurai, not in the sense of being a warrior, but having an active life as well as an artistic life. And it's also important for me, following in my parents' footsteps, that my life be more than just about me, that I serve something bigger than myself. And that was higher education. I found especially community colleges. My parents are both the first in the history of their families to finish high school. And my cousin Barbara and I are the first to get college degrees. And so community colleges are a home for a wide variety of people, but especially those who don't have a history of college attendance or success in their personal lives and their family lives. So poetry often ended up something I did late at night or on weekends. I retired as president of Germanna Community College in 2017. And I had, from 2 years or so before retiring, I was really making an effort to get momentum going in my writing and publishing. And I started off to say selfish and not so selfish reasons, but they're both really selfish. One was, I didn't know a lot of poets. I knew Alan Peterson, whose book had finished as one of the finalists of the National Book Critics Award a few years ago, and a handful of others. But I didn't have a community of poets. I didn't know anybody. And when I was in my 20s and I went to the Poetry Society that served the Detroit area, I walked in and spent the whole day being a walking ghost. Not one person said hello to me. So I wanted to find a community and also find a place to continue serving in some role where I could make a difference in some small way at least. And so Poetry Society has given me a lot of friends and colleagues and connections, but it's also given me a place to serve. And I need that. And that's why I said, you could say that's unselfish. Maybe it is, but I'm selfishly needing to be unselfish then.
That's wonderful. Would you like to read another poem at this point?
Sure. And this one's from the collection that's coming out next year. Speaking of which, Bob Arthur and our dear friend Jeff were co-editors of the San Francisco Bay Press. And they've published a lot of people, including those in Virginia. And Bob's daughter is now editing. And this is coming out under that imprint in the new year. Now, I had mentioned that I try to give voice to the other. The impetus of this was reading poems in translation, because unfortunately, even though my grandmother spoke Arabic, back then we were supposed to be Americans. We weren't supposed to learn other languages, so I never learned Arabic. But I read in translation poems by Arab writers from the diaspora, Palestinian exiles, exiles from the Syrian civil war, whatever. And I combined that reading experience with what I know about my grandfather, who came to the United States along with a lot of other Syrians and Lebanese to be a peddler because the streets in America were paved with gold. He was sold a bill of goods by the people that recruited him to come over. And he died before I was born, at a fairly young age of about 54. So I created a character who escapes the Syrian civil war in contemporary times and lives in the United States, is in exile, doesn't belong here, no longer belongs there. And in his voice or in narratives about him, there's a series of lyrics that make up this book. This is at the end of the collection. The final ambiguity of exile. He was never gone enough. He was never here. He may be on the ocean or in the sand or above both in the air. All he loved, he wedded to others, and all he warred, he widowed. He made himself a spring wind to blow with dry rain across what once was fertile. He made himself the crescent of moon that rhymed the morning before the third rising of the sun. What he had been, he cannot be. What he has become lies abandoned with his garden, glistening with the last evening's frost. The stone bird reaches with frozen wings in feathers of a riddle.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. I love the concept of the book and admire your ability to create that character and present from that voice.
Well, Nathan was kind enough to do a blurb for it, as Angie was for another book. And he mentioned, I'm not going to get your quote right, Nathan, but something to the effect that he didn't feel ever that he was in exile. But then when he read this, he realized that in some ways we all are, which did fit one of the themes I was hoping would come out of the book. Yes, it's about an imagined person based on real people, but I hoped no matter who the character was, that it would say something to everybody.
Nathan, would you like to read your third poem?
Yes. So the last poem, I decided to do this poem because I was trolling through Facebook today and read a farewell from Cheryl White. So Cheryl White, some of you may not know her, but she's a poet. She's a very artistic and activist type that's been in Norfolk for quite a while and worked in Norfolk and worked. She just went down in her farewell to Norfolk. She's got a new job in North Carolina. So she's a person that's been in the community for quite a while, and I've read alongside of her. I've been to open mics and heard her read and things like that, and so I decided to do this as a tribute to Cheryl White and to all the female voices that I've heard over my years. Generally, my slam teams end up being more female poets than men. And so I've just heard so many female voices throughout Virginia. So as I normally write poems, I'm only writing poems by observation, and I'm cataloging various things that I see. And sometimes it may take years, as a matter of fact, for that one thing to happen that will trigger an outpouring of what I've seen. And it comes out in a continuous loop, on the page. So the way this poem was birthed was that another young female poet called me one night to do this reading, and she said, I'm very nervous. She said, I'm feeling butterflies. And I'm like, good gracious, why would you be feeling butterflies? You're very talented, you're a spoken word poet and all this. She said, no, I don't know. It's just something, I'm just kind of nervous and I'm feeling butterflies. And so I wrote this poem, which is an ode to the voice of the female poet. It's called A Butterfly Recites a Poem.
Nice.
Stepping up to the mic, she said she was feeling some butterflies. And I've never seen butterflies with wings so big. Never imagined I'd be taken on a flight by a monarch on her migration across the Americas. Nervous, she must have forgotten that her wings and her heart were meant to move on the same beat. I was in a seat on the front row, saw her lips touch the open mic like she was kissing a dandelion in the mouth. And I swear I saw her fly right through and bend a rainbow. And later that night, in her tailwind, between her silhouette and the stars, there it was, her aurora borealis. This metamorphosis was not just your average makeover. It was much more magnificent than an ugly duckling turned swan. It was a moonshot that went clear around the sun. I was in a seat on the front row when her phoenix started rising, and I swear I saw her melt a man's ego like a dollop of butter on a frying pan. Please don't mistake her dragonfly for her butterfly. From caterpillar to cocoon to kaleidoscope, from womb to woman to queen, from candle to flashlight to moonbeam. I wish y'all could have heard what I seen when her voice went from silence to soft-spoken to outspoken, from broken to unbroken. Until now, I never even knew butterflies could talk. Now I know that a butterfly with a mouthful of nectar can spit poems. You've got, you muted.
I keep doing it.
Yeah.
I was just saying that was wonderful. And I imagine that the young lady you spoke of got to hear that poem at some point.
Like, hey, I wrote this poem. Yeah, so that's thinking about Cheryl White tonight. And I don't know if somebody will pass the word on her. We're gonna miss her. We've got poets that have left Virginia and then in other places. So, it's a great family of poets, and I'm happy to be on Virginia Poets, Virginia Voices tonight. Yeah.
Thank you. We're happy to have you and David. And our final question is about where you see Poetry Society going in the future, potentially in the next 100 years. We don't have to talk about 100, but, what would you like to see in the future of PSV? Either one of you can start. Are you ready to start, Nathan, or do you need a little?
No, I'll start. Another 100 years, definitely another 100 years. There are young poets out there that I meet. I'm teaching an ekphrastic poetry workshop over at the Torbler, the Newport Torbler Museum at CNU. And so there are high school students coming from all the high schools in Newport News, and they're coming through. And these are the young poets of the future. They're all very eager. They understand what David was saying about the connection between poetry, rap, rhythm and poetry, and traditional poetry. They get it. And so I just try to be, encourage them to get involved, to make a difference. I tell them poets are the bees of humanity, and they're in a world where things are really challenging. They ask you questions because they have a fear, a tangible fear about not just America, but about the world. This young lady asked me on Wednesday. She said, "Mr. Nathan, what do you write about?" And I started talking. She said, "No." She said, "How do you see the world?" And I said, "I see the world as drastically different than when I was growing up." To give you an idea, when I was a kid, my first car was a Pontiac Trans Am, and my first car. I was 19 years old, just out of high school, polishing that thing every day, and the cleaning kit in my trunk was Windex, Joy dish detergent, all of that. And I remember distinctly how much it took to keep the windows and the bumper clean, because if you drove 5 miles, now literally you can drive 400 miles and you get home with a clean windshield. Something is not right with our environment. Where have all the books gone? And so that's what they're facing. And I hope some poet can help define and make this a better place. So hopefully a poet from the Poetry Society of Virginia will write that poem.
How about you, David? How do you see us moving forward?
Well, first of all, as with many volunteer organizations, it's a challenge to get anybody under 50. Now, one reason is that they're very busy. Often have to have 3 jobs, when once upon a time, I had 1. Although my first job was in retail, and especially when I took over ownership of half of a music store, I didn't have any time either, because I was, there 6-7 days a week. But you also have to ask, are those organizations relevant to the future and the present of people who are under 50? And so our challenge as we celebrate our 100th anniversary is, so why should we be here another 100 years?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this for a while. I've run into some young people who look at my white hair and say, I don't even need to see, you don't exist as far as I'm concerned. But what I found from most of the young people, and this was true when I was serving as a college administrator, and I was asked to talk to people in high school or traditional age college students. And I see it now in my creative writing classes most of the time. Maybe it's because I'm the age of their grandfather, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even their great grandfather. They hunger for me to say something that matters, something that's hopeful, that can encourage them. And even at my age, I want someone to tell me I am the great poet, along with T.S. Eliot, who I believe said his for second greatest fear is he's never written a great poem. His first greatest fear is if he has, he never will again. I get that. But I can't tell them because I don't even know if I'm anything more than irrelevant myself. But I think that what if we paired the older poet with younger poet? Would that be a way of getting members, but also serving both of them? The one at the onset of their realistically some kind of twilight or near twilight of their career. Wouldn't it perhaps invigorate both? And wouldn't they both be able to give each other gifts? That might be something that would be worth trying.
Yeah, I think.
And might be in the more mundane interest of the poetry members who can continue and help us shape why we should be here for the next 100 years.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end. And I will say that it's not too different from a suggestion that Rich Follett gave not too long ago. Also the idea of setting up a sort of mentor program. And of course it would have to be voluntary because some people would be more interested in than others in doing that in terms of the older people already in the
wouldn't
society.
want to call it mentoring.
Yeah, we can call it something else, but that was what he.
I mean, I've served as a mentor for the local chamber, and if anything, I get more out of it than maybe the people I'm supposedly mentoring.
Yes, that's for sure.
So think about that program that would show more of a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to add on that again, as part of the community, as part of the committee, the Centennial Committee, we're definitely reaching out in a number of ways to add segments to the celebration, to the conference that include those voices, and to I would certainly encourage everyone who's listening to tell somebody not only about the Centennial celebration, but also about this year's poetry contest, in which we've added a category of them that we hadn't yet addressed, and some of the members came together and said, let's do this, and so that's available. So we want to encourage people to start somewhere, enter the door somewhere, and come in and let us hear you.
That sounds great. And I'm going to make a very, very short concluding sentence or two here, since we're almost at 6:30. But this will be, the recording of this will be put on the Poetry Society and the Poetry Virginia online YouTube station. So if you have friends that would like to watch, that would be great. And we will start from the Western region, and Karen Stewart, who is a member but now lives in North Carolina. So we hope you'll come back in January. And Angie, would you like to add anything? I know you were having some internet issues.
No,
I don't know if she's.
I can speak, but it's just a beautiful show. Thank you both for showing up so completely.
It was wonderful.
For sponsoring, and
we've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you. And all of you have a wonderful holiday.
Happy holidays.